The maintenance alarm in Detention Block 7 had been screaming for exactly 43 minutes when Security Chief Grack finally decided to investigate personally. What he found in Cell 47 was a human female, approximately 20 years old, sitting cross-legged on the metal floor and apparently teaching herself to juggle using 3 pieces of prison ration blocks. She looked up when he entered, smiled pleasantly, and continued her practice with casual confidence. "Good morning. I don't suppose you could tell me what time lunch is served? I've been here since yesterday, and I'm starting to think your hospitality standards might need some updating." Grack stared at the impossible sight before him. The cell's security systems showed no signs of tampering, yet somehow this small human had completely dismantled the feeding system, reprogrammed the environmental controls to play classical music, and apparently convinced the waste disposal unit to produce origami sculptures. "How did you do this?" he demanded, gesturing at the systematic conversion of maximum security prison cell into what appeared to be a comfortable living space. "Do what?" she asked innocently. "Oh, the improvements?" "Well, the original configuration was rather uninspiring. I thought a few modifications might make the stay more pleasant. The feeding system has been completely rebuilt." "Enhanced," she corrected gently. "The previous design was terribly inefficient. Now it can produce 47 different meal options instead of just that gray paste you were serving before." Grack's species had evolved from pack hunters, and his instincts were screaming warnings about prey that acted too confident. "You've been here less than 24 hours. It would take engineers weeks to make these modifications." "Well, I had time to kill," she replied reasonably. "And I've always been good with technical systems. Grandmother taught me that boredom was just another problem to solve." "Your grandmother?" "Oh yes, she was quite the engineer. Among other things." The human stood up with easy grace. "Speaking of which, I don't suppose anyone has mentioned why I'm being detained. I usually like to know what I'm being accused of before the trial starts." Grack consulted his datapad with trembling hands. According to the arrest report, this human had been apprehended after wandering into a restricted military zone and asking for directions to the nearest library. When questioned, she had cheerfully explained that she was just looking around. "You were found in Sector 12, Grack said carefully. "That's a classified military research facility." "Oh, was it? How interesting. I wondered why everyone seemed so nervous." She tilted her head thoughtfully. "Though I must say, for a research facility, it was remarkably short on actual research. Mostly just weapons development and strategic planning." "You observed classified military research?" "Well, I couldn't help noticing. Your security gave me quite a thorough tour. Very educational." The casual way she described infiltrating their most secure facility made Grack's stress hormones spike dangerously. That facility contains state secrets vital to Empire security. "Does it? I didn't see anything particularly innovative. Though I did notice your particle beam technology is about 3 generations behind optimal efficiency. You might want to look into quantum resonance amplification." "How do you know about quantum resonance amplification?" "Oh, here and there. Grandmother's old textbooks, mostly. She was quite advanced for her time." Grand Marshal Vortex chose that moment to arrive, his imposing figure filling the cell doorway, while his ceremonial armor clinked with authority. He had come to interrogate the human personally after receiving reports that made no rational sense. "Prisoner," he announced in his most commanding voice, "you will explain how you gained access to Sector 12, and what information you gathered." The human looked up at him with polite attention. "Oh, hello. You must be the Grand Marshal. I've heard quite a lot about you." "You've heard about me?" "Well, yes. Your tactical innovations during the Centauri campaign were quite impressive. Very creative use of pincer movements. Grandmother always said you had to respect good strategic thinking, even in potential adversaries." Vortex felt his primary brain stumble over the implications. "Potential adversaries?" "Oh, that's probably too strong a word," she said dismissively. "More like emerging tactical concerns. Your expansion patterns have been causing some discussion among my colleagues." "Your colleagues?" Fellow researchers, she explained helpfully. We maintain informal interest in regional military developments. Professional curiosity, you understand. Grak was now producing enough stress pheromones to trigger environmental alarms. What kind of research organization monitors military expansion? The kind that likes to stay informed about neighborhood developments, she replied pleasantly. You'd be surprised how quickly local conflicts can escalate into broader stability issues if left unaddressed. Are you threatening the Korthak Empire? Goodness, no. This is more of a preliminary assessment. We like to understand developing situations before they require more direct attention. The phrase, more direct attention, made Vortex's military training scream retreat signals. What sort of direct attention? Oh, you know, she said with a casual wave. Consultation services. Educational outreach. Sometimes species need guidance in making better strategic choices. It was at that moment that Vortex noticed what Grak had missed during his initial shock. The human's clothing wasn't civilian attire. It was a uniform, though the design was unlike anything in current galactic fashion. The cut suggested military origins, but the fabric and styling indicated age far beyond normal service life, and there were stains, faded to near invisibility but still detectable under the cell's harsh lighting. Dark patches marked the uniform's fabric in patterns that suggested close combat with multiple opponents. The distribution and fading indicated extreme age, as if the uniform had been worn through conflicts so ancient that entire civilizations had risen and fallen since the blood was spilled. Miss, Vortex said slowly, what is your name and organization? Captain Jess Walker, Terran Strategic Assessment Division, she replied, with military precision that contrasted sharply with her casual demeanor. Though I suppose my current assignment would be more accurately described as reconnaissance and preliminary evaluation. Terran Strategic Assessment Division? Grak's voice cracked. We have no record of any such organization. Well, that's the point, really, Jess explained reasonably. Effective assessment requires observing natural behavior patterns. Hard to get accurate data when everyone knows they're being watched. How long have you been watching us? Vortex asked. Oh, since the beginning, she replied matter-of-factly. Your species showed remarkable potential from the early developmental stages. We've been quite interested to see how far you'd progress. Since the beginning of what? Your civilization, naturally. We maintain observation protocols for emerging species that demonstrate significant military potential. The Korthak Empire was 8 centuries old, built through careful conquest and strategic expansion. The idea that an unknown human organization had been monitoring their development since their species first achieved spaceflight was impossible and terrifying. That's impossible, Grak protested. Humans are a minor species with limited technological capabilities. Are we? Jess asked with genuine curiosity. How interesting. What gave you that impression? Intelligence reports, diplomatic assessments, technological analysis? Oh, those. She waved dismissively. We found that maintaining low-profile classifications helps avoid unnecessary complications. Much easier to conduct accurate assessments when people underestimate your capabilities. Vortex examined the human more closely, his trained eye cataloging details that should have been obvious. Her posture wasn't civilian casual. It was the relaxed confidence of someone who'd never encountered a situation they couldn't handle. Her movements carried the efficiency of extensive combat training. And her uniform? Captain Walker, he said carefully. How old is your uniform? This old thing? She glanced down at herself with fond familiarity. Family heirloom. Passed down through 3 generations of Walker women. Grandmother always said it was important to remember where you came from. How old? Well, let's see. Great-grandmother received it during her active service period, passed it to grandmother, who handed it down to me when I graduated from the academy. She considered the question thoughtfully. I'd estimate around 1,200 years, give or take a century. 1,200 years. The bloodstains on her uniform were older than their entire empire. Your great-grandmother was military? Vortex asked, his voice barely audible. Oh yes, quite accomplished. She specialized in what we called species development guidance during her active years. very effective at helping aggressive civilizations learn to play nicely with their neighbors. The silence that followed lasted exactly long enough for the full implications to sink in. "Last visit?" he asked carefully, his mandibles clicking with barely controlled anxiety. "Well, yes. Though it's been quite some time. Your empire has grown significantly since then. Very impressive expansion, really. I remember when this entire sector was just empty space and ambitious dreams." The human's casual tone suggested she was discussing gardening techniques rather than military intelligence that should have been impossible for any outsider to possess. Vortex's species had built their empire through careful planning and overwhelming force, conquering 43 star systems over the course of 800 years. The idea that anyone could remember a time before their expansion was both absurd and deeply unsettling. "That's impossible," Security Chief Rex interrupted, his carapace darkening with agitation. "Our empire has dominated this sector for 8 centuries. No human civilization existed in this region before our arrival." "Oh, humans have been around for quite a while," she replied cheerfully. "We just prefer to keep a low profile most of the time. Less paperwork that way." Vortex examined the newcomer more closely, his trained military eye automatically cataloging details that might prove tactically relevant. Her uniform was definitely military in origin, though the cut and design suggested origins far older than any current galactic fashion. The fabric itself appeared to be some sort of synthetic blend that had aged remarkably well, considering its apparent antiquity. But what caught his attention were the stains. Faded to near invisibility but still detectable under the facility's advanced lighting. Dark patches marked the uniform's sleeves, chest, and collar. The pattern suggested splatter rather than spillage, and the distribution indicated that whoever had worn this uniform had been very close to something that bled extensively. "Miss," Vortex said slowly, "might I ask your name and the nature of your business here?" "Certainly. I'm Captain Jess Walker, Terran Defense Corps, though I suppose my current assignment would be more accurately described as diplomatic liaison." She consulted what appeared to be a standard data pad, though Vortex noticed it was constructed from materials he couldn't identify. "I'm here to discuss certain recent developments that have caused some concern among my superiors." "Terran Defense Corps?" Rex's carapace had progressed to a shade that indicated extreme agitation. "We have no record of any such organization." "Well, that's hardly surprising," Jess replied reasonably. "We're not particularly interested in keeping detailed records with every species we encounter. Creates unnecessary complications." "What sort of complications?" Vortex asked, though his survival instincts were suggesting he really didn't want to know the answer. "Oh, you know how it is. Once people know you exist, they start making assumptions about your intentions, your capabilities, your willingness to interfere in local affairs. Much easier to maintain operational flexibility when everyone assumes you're just another minor species with limited strategic significance." The casual way she described systematic deception made Vortex's stress chemicals increase production dramatically. "Operational flexibility?" "Strategic mobility," Jess clarified helpfully. "The ability to address developing situations without having to navigate complex diplomatic protocols or territorial sovereignty issues." "Address developing situations?" "Problem solving," she explained with the patience of someone talking to a particularly slow student. "When local conflicts threaten broader stability, sometimes direct intervention becomes necessary." Defense Coordinator Flint stepped forward, his weapon systems automatically activating in response to perceived threat levels. "Are you threatening the Korthak Empire?" "Threatening?" Jess looked genuinely puzzled. "Oh no, nothing like that. This is more of a friendly consultation. We've been monitoring certain expansionist activities in this sector, and some of my colleagues have expressed concern about the long-term implications." "Monitoring?" Vortex's tertiary brain was now screaming warnings in 17 different languages, while his primary brain tried to process the concept of an unknown human organization that had been watching his empire's development for centuries. "Routine observation," Jess assured him. "We keep track of species development, territorial expansion patterns, technological advancement rates, that sort of thing. Standard policy for maintaining regional stability." "How long have you been monitoring us?" Oh, since the beginning, really. Your species showed remarkable potential from the early stages. Very organized, excellent strategic thinking, impressive military efficiency. We were quite interested to see how far you'd develop. The phrase, "how far you'd develop," hung in the air like a death sentence. It suggested observation from a position of superior capability, the kind of clinical interest that apex predators showed in the development of their prey species. Miss Walker, Vortex said very carefully, what exactly is the nature of the concerns your superiors have expressed? Well, primarily they're related to your recent territorial acquisitions, Jess replied, consulting her mysterious datapad again. The expansion into the Outer Rim sectors, specifically. Some of the species in that region have requested assistance with what they describe as aggressive colonization policies. Requested assistance from whom? From us, naturally. We maintain informal peacekeeping arrangements with various civilizations throughout this part of the galaxy. Nothing official, you understand. Just friendly consultation services. Security Officer Blaze's forearms were now twitching in patterns that indicated imminent combat readiness. Peacekeeping arrangements? Conflict resolution, Jess explained cheerfully. When diplomatic solutions prove insufficient, sometimes more direct approaches become necessary. We have considerable experience in helping overambitious species reconsider their expansion strategies. The temperature in the facility's command center seemed to drop several degrees as the implications became clear. Conflict resolution. Direct approaches. Helping species reconsider their strategies. What sort of direct approaches? Defense Coordinator Flint asked, his weapons systems now fully activated. Oh, you know, Jess replied with a casual wave that somehow managed to be more menacing than any weapon Vortex had ever seen. Educational demonstrations. Practical lessons in the advantages of peaceful coexistence. Sometimes the most effective diplomacy involves showing people exactly what they have to lose. Educational demonstrations, Vortex repeated numbly. Applied learning experiences, Jess clarified. When theoretical discussions fail to produce behavioral changes, hands-on instruction often proves more effective. Grand Marshal Vortex's pattern recognition brain finally identified what had been bothering him about the stains on her uniform. They weren't random splatter patterns. They were organized, systematic, suggesting close-quarters combat with multiple opponents over extended periods. The fading indicated extreme age, but the distribution suggested someone who had spent considerable time in situations where violence was not just expected, but routine. Miss Walker, he said quietly, how old is your uniform? This old thing? She glanced down at herself with fond amusement. Grandmother passed it down to me when I graduated from the academy. She always said it was important to remember where you came from. How old? Well, let's see. Grandmother received it from her grandmother, who got it from hers. I'd estimate somewhere around 1,200 years, give or take a century or two. We're not particularly good at keeping detailed records about personal items. 1,200 years. The Korthak Empire was 8 centuries old, and this human was wearing a military uniform that predated their entire civilization by 400 years. A uniform that bore the stains of conflicts so ancient that entire species had risen and fallen since the blood was spilled. Your grandmother was military? Security Chief Rex asked, his carapace now cycling through colors that didn't exist in any known emotional spectrum. Oh yes. Quite accomplished, actually. She specialized in what we called species relations counseling during her active service years. Very effective at helping aggressive civilizations understand the benefits of peaceful expansion policies. Species relations counseling? Behavioral modification, Jess explained helpfully. When diplomatic negotiations failed to produce desired results, Grandmother would provide practical demonstrations of the consequences of continued aggressive expansion. What sort of consequences? The permanent kind, Jess replied with a smile that was absolutely terrifying in its genuine warmth. Grandmother always said that the most effective lessons were the ones that lasted forever. Defense Coordinator Flint's weapons systems were now producing targeting solutions for 17 different attack vectors, while his tactical computers calculated odds of survival that approached 0. You're describing military intervention. Educational outreach, Jess corrected gently. Grandmother preferred to think of it as teaching opportunities. She believed that every species had the potential for peaceful coexistence. They just needed proper guidance to realize it. What happened to the species that didn't respond to her guidance? Well, they learned to be more receptive to educational programs, Jess said matter-of-factly. Grandmother was quite thorough in her teaching methods. She believed in providing comprehensive instruction that left lasting impressions. The phrase, lasting impressions, carried implications that made Vortex's stress chemicals reach levels that triggered emergency metabolic responses. Miss Walker, are you here to provide similar educational services to the Korthak Empire? Oh goodness no, Jess laughed, the sound somehow more disturbing than any threat could have been. This is just a preliminary consultation. We prefer to give species the opportunity to modify their behavior voluntarily before implementing more comprehensive educational programs. And if we decline to modify our behavior? Well, then we'd move to the next phase of the consultation process, she replied pleasantly. Though I should mention that species who require advanced educational intervention tend to find the experience much less pleasant than voluntary behavioral modification. Security Officer Blaze had now drawn all 4 of his sidearms while backing toward the emergency exit. Are you threatening to destroy our empire? Destroy? Oh no, nothing so dramatic. We prefer educational transformation over destruction, much more efficient, and the results tend to be more stable long-term. Educational transformation? Comprehensive behavioral modification, Jess explained with academic precision. Instead of eliminating problematic species, we help them evolve into more constructive members of galactic civilization. Much more satisfying for everyone involved. Grand Marshal Vortex realized, with crystalline clarity, that he was talking to someone who represented a level of technological and military sophistication that made his empire's achievements look like children playing with toy soldiers. The casual way she discussed transforming entire civilizations suggested capabilities that exceeded his worst strategic nightmares. Miss Walker, he said desperately, what would voluntary behavioral modification involve? Oh, quite reasonable adjustments, really. Cessation of aggressive territorial expansion, implementation of peaceful coexistence protocols with neighboring species, conversion of military assets to civilian infrastructure development. She consulted her datapad again. Standard civilization maturity requirements. And the alternative? Comprehensive educational intervention, she replied cheerfully. Though I should warn you that species who require advanced instruction often find the transition period rather challenging. Challenging how? Well, transformation is always difficult. Breaking old habits, learning new behaviors, adapting to revised strategic priorities. Some species find the adjustment process quite traumatic. The word traumatic was delivered with such casual indifference that it triggered fight-or-flight responses in every Korthak present. This was someone who considered civilizational trauma a minor inconvenience in the educational process. How many species have you educated? Defense Coordinator Flint asked, his voice barely audible. Oh, I couldn't give you exact numbers off the top of my head, Jess replied thoughtfully. Grandmother's unit was quite busy during their active period, and record-keeping wasn't always consistent. But I'd estimate somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 or 50 complete transformations over the centuries. 40 or 50 complete transformations. Entire civilizations systematically modified by a species that treated galactic engineering as routine maintenance work. Miss Walker, Vortex said very quietly. What do you need from us? Well, primarily I need to file a preliminary assessment report with my superiors, she explained. They're particularly interested in your expansion timeline, territorial objectives, and willingness to consider alternative development strategies. Alternative development strategies? Peaceful growth models, she clarified. Instead of acquiring territory through military conquest, you might consider cooperative expansion through diplomatic partnership with existing species. Much more sustainable in the long term. And if we prefer our current expansion methods? Then we'd schedule you for comprehensive educational services, Jess replied with a smile that somehow managed to be both understanding and absolutely merciless. Though I should mention that our waiting list has gotten quite lengthy lately. Apparently, there are a lot of species in this part of the galaxy that require advanced instruction in peaceful coexistence. The implications were staggering. A systematic program of civilizational modification spanning centuries, operated by a species that had remained hidden while quietly reshaping galactic development according to their own specifications. How long would we have to make this decision? Security Chief Rex asked, his carapace now displaying colors that violated several laws of physics. "Oh, there's no immediate rush," Jess assured him. "We typically allow species several months to consider voluntary behavioral modification before scheduling intervention services. Though I should mention that voluntary cooperation generally results in much more pleasant transition experiences." Transition experiences? The adjustment period between your current civilization structure and your improved post-educational configuration, she explained helpfully. Voluntary participants usually find the process less disruptive to their existing social frameworks. Grand Marshal Vortex looked around at his senior staff and realized that 8 centuries of military development had just become irrelevant in the span of a single conversation. They were facing a species that treated interstellar empire building as a phase that civilizations needed to grow out of, backed by capabilities that made resistance seem not just futile, but absurdly optimistic. "Miss Walker," he said finally, "would it be possible to arrange a formal meeting between our leadership and your superiors?" "Oh, certainly," Jess replied brightly. "Though I should mention that formal diplomatic contact usually means you've been moved to the priority intervention list. My superiors tend to take personal interest in species that request direct consultation." "Is that good or bad?" "Well, it's very efficient," she said with terrifying cheerfulness. "Personal attention from senior staff usually results in very thorough educational outcomes." The silence that followed could have been measured in geological epochs as the leadership of the Korthak Empire contemplated their new position as students in a curriculum they'd never known existed. The silence stretched until Security Chief Grack's environmental suit began recycling air with audible desperation. Finally, Grand Marshal Vortex found his voice, though it carried the hollow tone of someone whose worldview had just collapsed. "Species development guidance," he repeated slowly. "What did that involve exactly?" Jess smiled with the fond expression of someone remembering family stories. "Oh, the usual. Diplomatic intervention, behavioral modification, occasional regime restructuring. Great-grandmother was particularly skilled at helping overambitious civilizations recognize the benefits of peaceful coexistence." "Regime restructuring?" Grack's voice cracked. "Educational transitions," she clarified cheerfully. "When species insisted on aggressive expansion despite repeated warnings, great-grandmother would provide comprehensive lessons in alternative governance models. What happened to species that didn't learn these lessons?" "Well, they all learned eventually," Jess replied with terrifying optimism. Great-grandmother was very thorough in her teaching methods. She believed in providing instruction that left permanent impressions on entire civilizations. Vortex felt his military training finally overcome his shock, launching into tactical assessment mode. "Captain Walker, how many species has your family educated?" "Oh, I couldn't give you exact numbers," she said thoughtfully. "The Walker women have been in the education business for quite some time. But based on grandmother's stories, I'd estimate somewhere around 60 successful interventions over the centuries. 60 civilizations. 60 species that had learned to play nicely under human guidance." The mathematical implications were staggering, an entire galactic sector quietly managed by a single human family line. "And now you're here to evaluate us?" Vortex asked. "Preliminary assessment only," Jess assured him. "Your recent expansion into the Outer Rim has generated some concern among the neighboring species. They've requested consultation services." "What kind of consultation?" "Standard peacekeeping protocols," she explained matter-of-factly. "When diplomatic solutions prove insufficient, we provide more direct educational assistance." The cell's modified environmental system chose that moment to announce lunch in 17 different languages, including several that had been classified as extinct. Jess perked up with genuine enthusiasm. "Oh, wonderful. I was getting quite hungry." She looked expectantly at her captors. "I don't suppose we could continue this conversation over a proper meal. I find these discussions go much better when everyone's comfortable." "You're our prisoner," Grack protested weakly. Am I? Jess looked around the modified cell with obvious satisfaction. I thought this was more of a temporary accommodation arrangement. Your hospitality has been quite acceptable, though I do think we need to discuss some policy adjustments. Policy adjustments? Territorial expansion guidelines, she clarified. My preliminary assessment suggests the Korthak Empire has been somewhat enthusiastic in its acquisition of neighboring systems. Vortex's tactical computer finally provided threat assessment data, though the results made no sense. According to every analysis protocol, the young human represented zero military threat. But his survival instincts were screaming warnings about apex predators who disguised themselves as harmless prey. What would these policy adjustments involve? He asked carefully. Oh, quite reasonable modifications, Jess replied brightly. Cessation of aggressive expansion, implementation of cooperative trade agreements with displaced species, conversion of military assets to civilian infrastructure, standard civilization maturity requirements. And if we refuse, then we'd move to comprehensive educational intervention, she said with the same tone someone might use to discuss weekend plans. Though I should mention that voluntary cooperation generally results in much more pleasant transition experiences. Transition to what? Improved social organization, Jess explained helpfully. Species that complete our educational programs typically discover that peaceful coexistence is much more rewarding than territorial conquest. The implications were becoming clear with horrifying precision. Humanity didn't destroy aggressive civilizations. They converted them, transformed them into something more acceptable, more manageable, more compatible with human preferences for galactic stability. How long do we have to make this decision? Grack asked. Oh, there's no immediate rush, Jess assured them. We typically allow several months for voluntary behavioral modification, though I should mention that early cooperation usually receives more favorable consideration in our final assessment. Final assessment? Educational intervention planning, she clarified. Species that demonstrate willingness to adapt voluntarily often find the transition process much less disruptive to their existing social frameworks. Vortex realized with crystalline clarity that the Korthak Empire had just been given an ultimatum disguised as a friendly suggestion. Comply voluntarily, or be subjected to whatever comprehensive educational intervention meant in human terms. Miss Walker, he said desperately, surely there's room for negotiation here? Our species has many positive qualities. Oh, absolutely, Jess agreed enthusiastically. The Korthak Empire has demonstrated remarkable organizational efficiency and strategic innovation. That's precisely why we're optimistic about your educational potential. Educational potential? Capacity for behavioral improvement, she explained. Species with strong leadership structures and disciplined populations typically adapt quite well to revised social priorities. The modified environmental system chimed again, this time producing what appeared to be a 3-course meal that smelled better than anything served in the facility's officers' mess. Jess clapped her hands with delight. Excellent. Nothing facilitates productive discussion like good food. She gestured toward the meal with casual hospitality. Please, join me. I find these policy discussions always go better when everyone's properly nourished. Vortex looked at the feast that had materialized in what was supposed to be a maximum security detention cell, produced by systems that his prisoner had modified during a single night using techniques that exceeded their best engineering capabilities. Captain Walker, he said quietly, what exactly are you? I'm a walker, she replied simply, as if that explained everything. We've been keeping an eye on galactic civilization for quite some time. Someone has to make sure everyone learns to get along. And if they don't, Jess's smile never wavered, but for just a moment, her eyes carried depths that spoke of centuries of systematic intervention, of civilizations guided toward better behavior through methods that left no room for refusal. Oh, they always do, she said cheerfully. Eventually. Outside the cell, alarms began sounding throughout the facility as security discovered that every detention system in the complex had been similarly modified overnight. In the command center, tactical computers registered the arrival of 17 unidentified vessels that hadn't appeared on sensors until they were already in orbit. The Korthak Empire's education was about to begin.